Hi everybody, we're going to cover the measures of central tendency in this video. First, I'm going to go over what measures of central tendency are. So measures of central tendency help us figure out what's typical or average about a particular data set. It helps us summarize large amounts of data in one single score. Something that researchers have to do often is they have to convey a lot of data and a lot of information in a short amount of time or a short amount of space. And so measures of central tendency come in handy to be able to sort of give people an idea of what the data look like overall. Instead of providing all of the details and specifics, we can just use measures of central tendency to tell people what was average or what the data set had in common. There's three types of measures of central tendency. The first one is the mean. We also have the median and the mode. The mean is known as the mathematical average, and that's because all of the numbers are taken together, added up, and then divided by the total number of scores to get our mathematical average. In order to do the mean, you actually have to have data that comes in the form of numbers. So we can find the average number of children in a data set. Let's say we survey 10 people. We can find out on average how many children they have. We can't find the mean of data that comes in categorical format. For example, we can't find the mathematical average of people's gender. We can ask 10 people what their gender is. And we can't find an average gender, But what we can do is use one of the other measures of central tendency, like the mode. So the mode tells us what's most common in the data set. So we can say, oh, the most common gender in our data set was woman or female. The median is a measure that helps us find the score that lies right in the middle of the data set. And the good thing about the median is that it removes all the outliers. So outliers are extreme scores in our data set. They might be really high compared to the rest of the data set or really low. And so median is good for ignoring those numbers so that they don't affect our averages. Let's talk a bit about each one. The mode is the simplest one because all it does is it takes into account which measure is the most popular, which category is the most popular. So for example, if we're looking at people's majors, and let's say out of 20 people, the most popular major is business. So that would be our mode. The mode is sort of the weakest of the measures of central tendency because all it does is look for whichever score is the most popular. It's still an important measure, but definitely not as important as the median or the mean. So the median, like I mentioned, is the measure that looks for the score that falls right in the middle. In order for you to be able to do this, you have to be able to rank everybody's score from lowest to highest, and then you find the score that falls right in the middle. Because of this, the median is also known as the 50th percentile. And then, like I mentioned before, it's not influenced by any outliers. So that's the good thing about the median. The mean, on the other hand, does get influenced by outliers. So when we have something called a skewed distribution, we want to use the median instead of the mean. So let's talk about the mean a little bit so we can get an idea of why it is that it's affected by outliers so much. The mean is known as the center of gravity because it takes all of the scores into consideration and finds the mathematical center. And so because it has to take all scores into consideration, it unfortunately includes high outliers and low outliers. So I can demonstrate this really quickly on a calculator on how averages are affected by extreme scores. I'm going to exit out of here and pull up my calculator. And hopefully you can see, but basically if you took Let's say you took a class and you were doing really well. You got a 95 on the first exam, a 90 on the second exam, and then a 96 on the third exam. Then came the final and you kind of bombed it. Let's say you got a 65 on it. Right? So you've been getting 90s this whole time, but that final killed you. So if we find your average is 86.5 on the exams. So you can see how one extreme score can really throw off your average. So that's why instead of using the mean, we use the median sometimes when there's extreme scores. Whenever there's extreme scores, we call this a skewed distribution. Distributions can be positively skewed or negatively skewed. And you should read about the two different types that we cover in this class in your textbook. Positive skews simply is when you have really high extreme outliers. So, for example, everybody's scoring really low, but there's one outlier who's scoring really high. That's a positively skewed distribution. Negatively skewed is when you have one really low outlier. So in our example, we had a negatively skewed distribution because most of the scores were in the 90s, except one which scored in the 60s. So that's a negative skew when you have a really low outlier. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video and set up a set of problems that we can work on using these measures.